Hi guys. Day 22. Rumble is fighting me, so I gotta set Rumble up real quick here. All right, here we go, guys. Rumble's all set. Here we go. Let's go. Boop. Thank you, Tasha. All right, hey, David. Instructor Mike. My dude, hope you're doing well. Hope you are doing well, man. Looks like things have been going pretty good for you lately. Hope, we need to get back. We need to link back up at some point. It's been too long. It's been too long. So, good to see you, Mike. Good to see you. Guys, if you guys haven't, Instructor Mike over at YouTube, always good information that's out there, so look him up if you get the chance. I think it's well worth the sub. So, definitely a good channel. Definitely a good resource. So, guys, we're going to do day 22, part 2 of Michelle Troconis. I know that beginning was kind of a snoozer, so let's see if we can get a little more out of this. But like I said, we're just gonna have to see. Remember, we're in the sunk cost situation, though. What are we here? Hold on. Why is this? All right. So here we go. You want to fight me so much. You guys hear me? It looks like my thing shut off for a second. Oh, that was weird. Why are we?
Yes.
It says I'm really quiet. Okay. Huh. All right, so here we go, guys.
Judge, just before we bring in the jury to call the next witness, I did just want to bring a legal issue to the court's attention. Attorney Schoenhorn indicated to me yesterday that he would be objecting to the AT&T records coming in without an authenticating witness. I don't know if that's still his position, but it was my intention to use those records at this time.
I will just note, Your Honor, that the state provided me with an affidavit, which I believe does not comport with new Code of Evidence 9-3A, although there are two affidavits. One is dated yesterday, or maybe, what's the, not yesterday, a couple of days ago. The other is dated a couple of months ago. In any event, I submit that. Well, there are two issues. One is it states that the specific records and the certification have to be provided sufficiently in advance of the offer to provide an adverse party with a fair opportunity to challenge them. So this was provided within the last couple of days, this affidavit. But in any event, I don't believe the affidavit complies with subsection A3 of new 9-3A. It appears to, on its face, the business record affidavit comply with a federal rule. It specifically recites the federal rule, but Connecticut's Code of Evidence is different in that respect. And specifically, it requires that the affidavit state either that it is based on the entrant's own observations or on information of others whose business duty it was to transmit it to the entrant. And I submit that neither of those are in the affidavit. Therefore, I've indicated to Mr. McGinnis, actually at least 2 weeks ago, that I was going to request that an AT&T representative appear. And I had indicated even to Your Honor that part of the issue was to explore whether or not these records were obtained or were subject to erasure that were therefore obtained in violation of the Fourth Amendment. But I'm just sticking right now, we're not making a constitutional argument to my claim that under new Rule of Evidence 9-3A, which was approved in 2022, that the affidavits do not comport with the requirements of that section under the business record authentication requirement, and therefore a business custodian of records would be required to testify.
Judge, obviously I disagree. I think that the affidavit itself fully complies with 9-3A. Just with respect to notice the opposing party, we had been going, my recollection is we've been going back and forth as to whether or not someone was going to be required. And it wasn't really until last week that Mr. Schoenhorn indicated yes, for sure, that he was going to demand that someone from AT&T be present. But I'll just note the following for the record. With respect to Mr. Dulos' records, I would imagine he's had those for several years, although I guess he could represent the specific date. I wasn't involved with the case at that point. And with respect to Mr. Troconis' records, he's had those since at least November 16th, and that affidavit is, that was a more recent search warrant, as the court will recall. And I could pass forward a copy of one of the affidavits. They look the same if the court wants to, check it against the subsection. But I can tell you, Judge, that this affidavit fully complies with 9-3A. It indicates that the person making the affidavit is qualified to authenticate the records because they're familiar with how the records were created, managed, stored, and retrieved, that they are true duplicates of the original records. They were made at or near the time of the occurrence of the matter set forth by or from information transmitted by a person with knowledge of those matters. They were kept in the ordinary course of the regularly conducted business activity of AT&T, and they were made at AT&T as a regular practice.
I would ask the court just to look at the affidavit. And like I said, I think that the business record rule may be an exception to the confrontation clause, but I would argue that it would have to be strictly construed in order for that to be admissible. I have no objection to the court looking at it. I believe it doesn't comply, and it would be a simple matter to look at.
Well, if it's a confrontation argument that they're making, Judge, then you can dispense with this pretty easily. These are business records that are not kept for the specific purpose of criminal litigation. And so obviously if they're kept in the ordinary course of business, as this affidavit attests to, then there is no testimonial piece of this because they weren't generated.
Real quick, Robert, you're saying at a StreamYard sponsorship? That's news to me, unless you know something I don't know. If you do, that's cool, but I'm not sure what you're talking about. So.
For the purpose of criminal litigation. So I think if that's the argument, then I think the court can quickly dispense with it, but I'm happy to pass forward a copy of the affidavit.
Thank you. Well, the court hears two arguments. The court hears one argument concerning authentication and another argument concerning business records. There is a business records exception to the hearsay rule. That exception requires, well, is this a business record or is it a public record?
It is a business record, Judge.
If it's kept in the regular course of business, and it is that business's business to keep such records in its regular course, that seems to have jumped both hurdles, if it's a business record. The question now is whether it is authenticated. And the claim is that, well, the court should probably read the
Certainly.
affidavit. Thank you.
He is not thrilled he has to sort this problem out for them.
Well, according to the certificate of authenticity, paragraph A reads, all records attached to this certificate were made at or near the time of the occurrence of the matter set forth by or from information transmitted by a person with knowledge of those matters. That seems to satisfy section 9(3)(a). The entrant is not indicating that it is from his or her own personal observation, but from, and this is the difference between the public records exception and the business record, or rather authentication section of the code. The public records exception requires the entrant either to have personal knowledge or someone other than the entrant who has personal knowledge who has the duty to transmit. 9(3)(a) does not require those who have a duty to transmit to have a personal knowledge. It reads, the information contained in the record was based on the entrant's own observation or on information of others whose business duty it was to transmit it to the entrant. The others need not have personal knowledge. So the court, in reading section A, concludes that the affidavit satisfies section 9(3)(a).
Got the mark then for ID, then for the record?
Yes, thank you.
I have no objection to that, Judge. I do have the records themselves, which I'm going to be introducing on a disc. The affidavit is actually on this disc, so I don't know if the court needs to mark that specific one, or I suppose we
We
can.
should probably mark both.
Sure. And I'm just going to take an opportunity to mark the two exhibits.
Yes.
If that's what.
We can bring the jury in.
Yes, sir.
Would counsel stipulate, please?
Yes, Judge.
Yes.
Thank you. Attorney McGinnis.
Judge, the state calls Special Agent Kevin Hoyland of the FBI.
Do you solemnly swear or solemnly and sincerely affirm, as the case may be, that the evidence you shall give
Oh, it's the Nick
concerning
Offerman
this case shall be
guy.
the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, or upon penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Kevin, K-E-V-I-N, Hoyland, H-O-Y-L-A-N-D.
Thank you.
Mr. Hoyland, you may be seated.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Agent Hoyland.
Good afternoon.
Would you just tell the jury where you're employed?
I work for the FBI,
What is your current title with the FBI?
special agent,
How long have you been a special
He's
agent
a liar.
with the FBI?
since 2012.
And I know that this is probably goes without saying, but FBI stands for Federal Bureau of Investigation, correct?
It does, yes.
And as far as education, how far did you go in college?
I have an undergraduate degree in finance. I have a MBA, Master's in Business Administration, and I also have my CPA license.
Where were you employed prior to being a special agent with the FBI?
I worked at Dunkin' Donuts Corporate in Massachusetts.
Now, with respect to your responsibilities with the FBI, what are your responsibilities as a special agent?
Presently, I'm a full-time member of the Cellular Analysis Survey Team, otherwise known as the CAS team.
And what is the CAS team?
The CAS team is a specialized unit of investigators responsible for analyzing phone records provided by the cell phone companies to understand the general location of where a phone was or wasn't when it had made or received phone calls.
And how many people are part of the CAS team?
Across the country, there's approximately 80 or 90 of us. 20 of us, like myself, do it full-time.
And of the 20 that do it full-time, how many are situated here in the Northeast?
Just me.
All right, and in fact, you drove down from New Hampshire today to testify, is that correct?
I did.
And would you mind just telling the jury what historical cell site analysis is?
Sure. So historical cell site analysis involves taking those records I mentioned that the phone companies keep in a normal course of their business and reviewing them and reviewing the cell tower information that gets recorded every time your phone makes or receives calls. And by looking at that information and where those towers are physically located on the earth, I can begin to formulate an opinion as to the general location of where a phone was when it had made or received those calls or text messages.
And what would be the purpose of doing such an analysis?
The purpose for that is to understand, again, the general location for a device. So our unit gets called upon for kidnapped children, Amber Alerts, fugitives, really any investigation where there's a phone in play. Using these historical records is very helpful to understand, again, where that phone is to locate the person holding that phone.
As part of CAS, have you received any specialized training regarding cellular telephones, technology, and historical cell site analysis?
I have.
Please explain the training you received.
Sure. To date, it's been hundreds and hundreds of hours. Originally, I was certified with CAST in 2016, which involved a litany of training from both the FBI and other government agencies. Academia also provided training during our certification, as well as companies that build technology and tools that are used in the telecom industry. Most importantly, as part of certification and every year thereafter, I've received training directly from the phone companies themselves. So the Verizons, AT&Ts, T-Mobiles of the world send their subpoena compliance folks and their engineers to our conferences to educate us on exactly how their network operates, how their records get generated, and any sort of nuances that their company may have.
And how often do you actually analyze call detail records?
Every day.
And have you ever worked on cases where you were called upon to determine the location of a cell phone?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to validate your historical cell site analysis?
I have.
And how have you done that?
Validation is multiple different ways. One, I've used test phones that I've had in my possession that I've gone out and recorded activity and then looked at the records. I've assisted phone companies in testing their new tools that they're going to roll out and features that they're going to roll out in their network. And then most importantly, the validation and the real validation is real world examples, right? When I get a phone call at 3 in the morning that a kid has been taken, and I use this technique to then figure out the location of a device tied to that kidnapping, and we end up finding that child there. That, hands down, is the best validation.
You mentioned some of the training that you've received in historical cell site analysis, but have you also done trainings as an instructor?
Yes, I've trained over 500 led formal training to over 500 students of state, local, federal, and international law enforcement over the years, as well as countless informal trainings.
And have you been qualified and testified as an expert in the area of historical cell site analysis?
I have.
Approximately how many times?
A little over 50 times.
And in which courts?
State and federal, all over the country, here in Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Colorado, Wyoming, Arizona, North Carolina, Nebraska, Washington, D.C. I think that covers most of them.
Did you complete a historical cell site analysis for this case?
I did.
And did you prepare a PowerPoint to assist in the explanation of your analysis?
I did.
Judge, I am approaching with State's Exhibit 145 as well as State's Exhibit 147.
Thank you.
I'm just going to ask if you wouldn't mind looking at that and tell me what it is.
This appears to be the report I put together for the case.
And did you prepare that in the ordinary course of business?
Yes.
Judge, I move it in.
Which one are we talking about?
The PowerPoint.
Let me just compare it.
Which number is that, please?
145. I'll take it back so that Mr. Schulberg can.
I just want to compare this thing. I have no objection.
States 145 admitted as full.
Judge, States 147 is a DVD, which also contains States 145, just so that I can display it on the screen. Do you have an objection to this?
Well, I have no objection to him using both. I think one should be a letter A of the other exhibit rather than a separate exhibit, so the jury understands it's the same exhibit, just one's in electronic format and the other's in paper. I don't know if it should be two separate exhibits.
Well, it probably does not make much difference since there will be a list of all of the exhibits, but it will be 145A.
So let me just have the clerk remark this. Handing you States 145.
Thank you.
Agent Hoyland, can you just tell the jury what phone numbers and devices you did an analysis for in that particular PowerPoint?
Sure. In this instance, we're looking at phone number 860-478-8625, which was an AT&T number, as well as a 305-331-5232, which was also an AT&T number.
And who are those phone numbers associated with?
The first phone number, the 8625, was associated with Mr. Dulos, and the 5232 was associated with Mr. Troconis.
Yeah, I'll slow down.
Always the true test.
Okay. We'll disregard the helper. All right. I'm displaying States Exhibit 138, which is a detail log sheet. And I'm going to see if I could zoom in. Agent Hoyland, is that visible in front?
Now I can see it. Yep.
Okay, all right. And sir, States Exhibit 138, I'm just going to direct your attention to a phone number here on the left-hand side, 305-331-5232. Are you familiar with that phone number?
That is the phone number associated with Mr. Troconis.
I'm sorry?
That's the phone number associated with Mr. Troconis.
Understood. Okay, thank you. Oh, and just before I publish the CAS PowerPoint, Judge, the AT&T records were marked as States 146. I'm going to move those into evidence at this time.
based on what I indicated before. That's-
States 146 admitted as full.
And Agent Hoyle, I am going to be displaying your PowerPoint, however, you have the hard copy in front of you too, if you need to refer to it. Is that all right?
Sounds great.
All right. Agent Hoyle, can you just tell us what this first page is?
This first page is just the traditional cover sheet indicating the phone numbers that I looked at, the corresponding FBI case, and when I completed the analysis.
And can we just go to the next page, page 2? Can you briefly just tell the jury how a cell phone works and communicates with a cellular network?
Of course. So while your phone's on and in your pocket, it's constantly scanning its environment, and it's looking for cell sites associated with your carrier. So if you have a Verizon phone, it's only looking for Verizon cell towers. You could be standing right next to an AT&T one.
Okay, some of the stuff he's telling us is true. So while feds lie, this basic part is true, guys. If you guys don't understand info security, you're going to learn some things here.
Your phone would never see it. But while it's looking for those cell towers, it's taking measurements, and it's recording which tower and corresponding sector, which I'll probably touch on in a moment, it sees as best. And it creates a log in the phone of all of the cell towers it sees as best. So that when you hit send on your phone reaches out to that particular tower and says, hey, I have a phone call to make. The tower accepts that call, records that information in your call detail record, and your call goes ahead and goes through. You end up talking to your friend on the other line. That's the basis of how the phone works.
And if we can go to the next slide. Now, you mentioned a cell tower. What is a cell tower?
So a cell tower, sometimes known as a cell site, it's traditionally it was those big ugly things on the side of highways, those big metal structures that have antennas all over them. Nowadays, they've become a little bit smaller, right? They're 4G, and now with 5G, you see little antennas on the sides of buildings. Actually, you can see some on the side of that apartment complex right there at the roof. See those little white things, the FAR apartment complex, those little 3 or 4 white vertical pieces straight out there? That's a cell tower. They're on the sides of buildings, they're on top of light poles, they're no longer those big behemoths. But all of those things are what the phone uses to communicate with the network. And that is what your phone uses to exchange radio frequency, which has your voice or your text or your internet surfing on it. So they're sort of all over the place these days.
And you mentioned that the phone will reach out to the strongest tower. Is that correct?
The phone's going to reach out to the best tower, the
Best
tower it
tower.
sees as best. So cleanest, clearest, and overall best signal based on the network parameters and priorities. So that's not always going to be the closest tower, but it will always be the tower that the phone saw as best at that spot on the earth.
And what records do cell phone companies keep based on the activity you just described?
So I had referred to call detail records. They're essentially billing records. It just says who called who, when that call occurred, date, time, how long it lasted. What separates call detail records from billing records, though, is it also gives us that last piece of information. What cell tower did the phone utilize for that particular call?
If we just go to the next, well, actually, before we go to the next slide, you had also mentioned sectors earlier. You said you were going to get to that. Can you explain what a sector is?
Yeah, and actually, it might be easiest if we could move one slide ahead.
Sure.
To help visualize it. So the design on the right here, imagine you're in the air and you're looking down on top of a cell tower. A cell tower, it covers 360 degrees, a circle, right? Most towers are broken up into sectors, and most commonly, 3 sectors is the orientation that towers have. So if you take 360 degrees of a circle, divided by 3, each sector covers approximately 120 degrees. That information is also provided in the call detail record. So not only do we know the cell tower, but we know which sector the phone had utilized. And this becomes important because it can help us help infer the location of the phone relative to the tower. So in this hypothetical behind me, imagine the phone had recorded this tower and sector 1. We would know that in this case, sector 1 points due north, that the phone had to be somewhere north of that tower. Because if it was southwest of that tower or southeast of that tower, it would have chosen sector 2 or sector 3 for the call. In this case, it chose sector 1. So again, we know that the phone is somewhere north of that tower at that point in time to see that tower and sector as best.
Do records held by phone companies typically encompass data information such as FaceTime calls or FaceTime audio calls?
Those particular types of transactions, so anything related to an app, which FaceTime, iMessage, all of those things are carried over the data side of the network. So all the carriers have three distinct sets of information. There's voice calls, there's text messages, and then there's data. In this case, we didn't get data. But even if we had, it wouldn't show us transactional levels of detail. So it wouldn't show us a FaceTime call. All it would show is that at some point a data session had opened up, it had requested resources from a tower. It remained open for a period of time, bytes were exchanged up and down, and then it closed. We can't infer what's going on when those situations occur. The phone could have been in a FaceTime call, the phone could have been sending iMessages back and forth, it could have been on WhatsApp, or the phone could have just been turned on and sitting on someone's desk and an email notification came in, or some other, pop-up where it wasn't user initiated.
And you had mentioned that you were asked to review cell phone records. Actually, can we go to the next slide? And would you just explain to the jury what we're seeing in this slide?
Sure. So these particular illustrations are what we will see most commonly in the slides and maps that I completed for this report. So the pie wedge that you see behind me, that reflects the sector the phone had utilized at the timestamp shown. One thing to point out is that the shaded area on that pie wedge, that's not the coverage area. And I want to be very clear about that. That is merely a visual to help understand that that's the direction that that particular sector faces. At the bottom, you see a call-out box. It lists the cell ID, excuse me, the phone number that had created that transaction, the timestamp, which is adjusted to local time, whether or not it was an incoming call or text message or outgoing, how long the call lasted is the next number, that 36 in this example. And then lastly, the far right is the opposing number. So if I spoke with you, my number, and we were looking at my records, my number would be on the left side. Your number, the number I spoke with, would be on the far right.
Now, were you asked to review records for cellular phone number ending 8625 belonging to Mr. Dulos?
Yes,
And also with respect to a cellular phone number ending 5232 belonging to Michelle Troconis, is that correct?
yes it is.
All right, and I'm just going to ask if we can go to the next slide. And this particular slide just shows the phone number and account information for that particular subscriber, is that correct?
Correct. This is the AT&T subscriber information for number ending 8625, which comes back to Mr. Dulos.
And the next slide. And this slide provides information for Michelle Troconis' device, is that correct?
Correct.
And is it your understanding that Maricela Areza is her mother, or you're not sure?
I'm not sure, actually.
Okay. Next slide. What are we seeing here?
There was a handful of locations that investigators had provided to me in support of me doing my analysis. Those locations are shown here with the address in the middle, as well as a corresponding map icon. On each of the slides, on the maps themselves, I have a legend where this information is there as well, so it's not like you need to memorize it. But a residence in Farmington, a property on 80 Mountain Spring Road in Farmington. There was an area in Hartford that I was asked to look at, Russell Speeder Car Wash in Avon. And then lastly, on this map, you're going to see a bunch of blue dots, and those are going to represent the other AT&T towers in the area that the phone didn't utilize during the time frame mapped out.
And did you use any particular software to map this out?
Yes.
What software is that?
The software we use is known as ESPA, E-S-P-A.
And what does ESPA do?
ESPA takes the records that we receive originally from AT&T and visualizes them. So AT&T records contain a lot of the information I just mentioned. That allows us to put dots on a map, allows us to visualize which cell towers were utilized, where those cell towers are located in correspondence or in relation to the locations provided here.
All right, you have the next slide, please. All right, Agent Hoyland, I don't know if it would be easier for you to step up to the screen at this point for the next several slides,
Sure.
just to kind of explain to the jury what we're looking at here. And just before we, there's a big screen behind you.
Is that okay, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you.
And just before we get there, there are various boxes, and the top of the box is blue and begins with the letter CID. Could you just indicate to the jury what that means?
Sure. So using this as an example, CID represents cell ID. So that is the AT&T identifier for the particular tower shown here. So each of these call-out boxes are associated with different events during this time period of the evening of May 23rd, 2019 through early morning hours of May 24th. So just as an example, this box up here, CID 2582, this is the tower and sector represented by CID 2582. There was a total of 4 transactions from 1008 through 1012 from into Mr. Dulos' device. So as you'll notice, there's 2 colors up here. I have black associated with Mr. Dulos' device and green associated with Mr. Troconis'. So whenever you see those colors, you know that that's the particular phone that we're talking about. Taken in totality, though, what we have here is a handful of activity from these two devices utilizing towers and sectors all facing back towards the residence. This particular cell site up here, CID 20123, is unique. It's known as a femtocell. So if anybody, either themselves or has a relative that has really poor cell phone reception in their house, they can buy a device to plug in to their internet to boost the signal, essentially. It's known as a femtocell. It gets a unique identifier, and the particular lat and long of that cell tower is the latitude and longitude of the house. What this means is that that particular femtocell is installed in the residence, and so when the phone is using that particular CID 20123, we know that the phone is at the residence or on the property.
And there's a green marker also in the center of the slide. Would you just indicate to the jury what that is?
Of course. So this green marker represents 80 Mountain Spring Road. As you can see, they're in close proximity to one another. But again, this is consistent with both devices being in and around that area on the evening of May 23rd, 2019 through the 12:59 a.m. on May 24th.
Okay. And I'm just going to go to the next slide. Agent Holman, could you just indicate to the jury what we're seeing in this slide?
Of course. So the next morning, beginning at 7:16, Mr. Dulos' device utilized the home cell site, I'll call it, the femtocell, the one that's stationed at the house, for this incoming call. At 7:45, Mr. Troconis' device utilized this tower and sector up here, facing away, obviously, up in Avon. There was an outgoing call placed for nearly 1,000 seconds. At 8:02, Mr. Troconis' device utilized this tower and sector here back closer to the house. This would be consistent with Mr. Troconis' device traveling back south towards the residence between 7:45 and 8:02. At 8:38, and again at 8:41, Mr. Troconis' device used the home cell site. There were outgoing calls at that time. This would be consistent with her device now being at home at 8:38. However, prior to that, at 8:26, there was an incoming call to Mr. Dulos' device through that same home cell site. That call was an international call from a Greece number. That call was answered and lasted approximately 18 seconds.
So roughly, just to be clear, roughly 12 minutes after the call from Greece, Mr. Troconis' device utilized the home, what's the terminology?
Called the home cell site for
Home cell
simplicity's
site?
sake.
Is that
Yes.
correct?
So the chronological would be 8:02, Mr. Troconis' device is using this tower and sector here, west of the house. Then at 8:26, there's the call from Greece that is answered. And then at 8:38, Mr. Troconis' device itself places an outgoing call through the home cell site.
Next slide, please. Agent Holman, can you tell us what your conclusions were with respect to this slide?
Sure. So starting down here again, CID 20123, the home cell site.
Uh-oh.
Mr. Dulos' device has a litany of incoming calls that are not answered. That first one is at 8:02, and they continue until 12:17. The first call that is answered, or the first activity that shows user interaction, would be this outgoing call at 1:19 for Mr. Dulos' device. Also of note in here is another call from Greece at 10:33. Concurrently, Mr. Troconis' device leaves the area of the residence.
Wait, he's
and
got an
utilizes
outgoing
this tower
call at
sector up here.
11:52.
At
Wasn't he
9:38,
addressing that?
there's an outgoing call. And then at 10:04, there's an incoming call, both through the same tower and sector. By 11:52, her phone has returned to the house, places an outgoing call through that home cell site. Can't say, of course, where her phone was between 10:04 and 11:52. There was no activity to map out. But that is sort of the totality of what's going on here.
And,
That's not a good
Agent Holman,
look.
You'll forgive me because I have a hard time seeing the screen. Can you just indicate to the jury how many missed calls Mr. Dulos had after the Greece call?
Well, I'm going to object. I don't think that's within the scope of his testimony or his purview. His testimony has to do with cell towers, not how many were answered or not answered. That's not his field.
Well, there was testimony that there were a number of calls that went unanswered. That's already in evidence. And so counsel is asking how many went unanswered, overruled.
We have, there was a total of 9 incoming calls that were unanswered.
And if we go back to the previous slide, was there additional unanswered calls between 7:16 and 8:41?
Yes, with Mr. Dulos' device, there was one unanswered call at 7:16, and then the call from Greece at 8:26.
Okay, so from 7:16 a.m. until 1:19 p.m., the only phone call that was answered or where there's user activity is this call from Greece. Is that correct?
I believe the 119 is an outgoing call, but yes, prior to that, there was a total of 10 incoming calls that were not answered, one answered call at 8:26 from Greece.
Okay. And I think we can jump ahead 2 slides, actually. Agent Holm, with respect to this particular slide, can you just indicate to the jury what your conclusions were?
Sure. At 1:53, Mr. Troconis' device received an incoming call from Mr. Dulos, and she had utilized the home cell site, as shown here. Mr. Dulos' device utilized this tower and sector up here near Avon to place that outgoing call. This would be consistent with the two devices not being together, not being at the home at that time.
Next slide. With respect to this slide, 3:16 to 5:16 p.m., can you just indicate to the jury what your conclusions are?
Of course. So we're still on May 24th. Here at 3:16, Mr. Dulos' device placed an outgoing call to Mr. Troconis. Ms. Troconis received that call through this tower and sector here. Mr. Dulos then placed another outgoing call to Mr. Troconis at 3:35. Mr. Troconis' device received that phone call through the tower, the home cell site that we're calling it. There was some additional activity with Mr. Dulos' device as well as Mr. Troconis' device off of this tower and sector at 3:39. Mr. Troconis used it at 3:57. At 4:06, Mr. Troconis' device now utilized this tower and sector down here to receive a text message before subsequently returning eventually to the residence at 5:16 when she received an incoming call from Mr. Dulos again. Mr. Dulos' device, interestingly enough, at 4:48 and 5:06, utilized the home cell site before returning up and using this particular tower and sector at 5:16.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, all told, a lot of activity. It's a little bit of a busy slide. But there was 4 total calls between Mr. Troconis and Mr. Dulos at 3:16, 3:35, 3:57, and 5:16.
And Agent Hoyland, I wanted to ask you, I want you to assume with respect to CIDs 51149-16 and 51149-9, I want you to assume that when Mr. Dulos' user activity occurred, that he was at 80 Mountain Spring Road for a moment. How would he be hitting off that tower all the way at the top of the slide?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, the phone doesn't always use the closest tower. It's going to use the tower it sees as best. One way to think about that is here. We have, imagine we're standing in an office building or in a courtroom or at a window. We have direct line of sight to that cell tower that was on top of that roof that I had mentioned before. Now, let's say my phone sees that cell tower or cell site. Now, on the other side of the building, maybe only a block or 2 away, my phone sees another cell site. My phone would likely choose that one, even though it's a little bit farther away, because it has clear line of sight. There's no obstructions. The radio frequency from my phone doesn't have to go through the concrete and rebar and rest of this courtroom and courthouse to reach the tower that's a little bit closer. So in your situation, here's the residence. There are some cell sites that are a little bit closer. This I know because I looked, is a very densely wooded area. Where this particular cell tower sits, there happens to be a ravine that sort of crisscrosses down towards the residence. When you have densely wooded area, obviously woods, trees can't grow in water, right? So what it ends up doing is it creates a funnel where radio frequency could just sort of travel right down that path. If the phones were down here and still using this cell site, that is what I believe would have happened. Unfortunately, it is too long ago to go back and do any further testing to confirm the actual coverage areas of these particular towers.
Understood. Next slide. All right, this is activity from 3:16 to 3:35. Can you just tell the jury what we're looking at here?
Sure. This is just a pared down version of the slide before. I'm just focusing on the 2 calls that I had mentioned. So at 3:16, Mr. Dulos placed an outgoing call that Mr. Troconis' device received through this tower and sector here. And then at 3:35, he placed another, or his device placed another call, which Mr. Troconis received at 3:35 at the home cell site.
And just with respect to, I mean, this information doesn't always, this information doesn't tell us exactly where a phone is. Is that correct?
Correct. It's not a pinpoint precision. The phone is on this street corner kind of thing. We know that the phone had to see the particular towers and sectors shown as best as to wherever they were on the earth.
But what's the significance of the home cell site with relation to where a phone would be?
Well, as mentioned, the home cell site's unique because the femtocell, or the device that the phone would connect to at home, is designed to provide all the coverage to the residents. Think of it as like Wi-Fi. If you go too far out into your yard, you might lose Wi-Fi connectivity. The same applies for a femtocell. Additionally, femtocell, you have to have phone whitelisted to use that. That means that the device, you have to tell the device that this phone, this phone, and this phone can use this particular cell site. No other phones can. So, given those 2 things, when the phone is using the 20123s, that tells me that it is most likely at a residence.
All right, and this is activity summary 5/24/19, 7:47 to 8:27. Can you indicate for the jury what we're looking at here?
Of course. So as you can see, later in the evening, on May 24th, Mr. Dulos' device travels away from the residence and utilizes this particular tower and sector here at 747. This is in the vicinity of Albany Avenue there in Hartford. He makes an outgoing call to Mr. McElwain, is my understanding. At 8:15 and at 8:26, Mr. Troconis' device received incoming calls through the home cell site, putting, again, the device home at that moment. And then at 8:27, Mr. Dulos' device placed an outgoing call through the home cell site. That tells us at some point between 7:47 and 8:27, Mr. Dulos' device traveled from the Hartford area back to the residence.
It's a very real possibility. If they don't know about and here's the problem. A lot of times they probably check to see if they paid for phones with their credit cards or something, or if they used cards to activate the phones. So that's why there's ways to activate burner phones without doing that. So yeah, that very well could have been the case. I don't think they were that sophisticated though. I honestly don't, but that's a very real possibility.
Next slide. All right, and now we're jumping ahead to May 29, 2019, 8:39 a.m. to 9:13 a.m. and then 2:20 p.m. is the slide. Could you just indicate for the jury what we're looking at here?
Have to. So on this morning at 8:39, Mr. Troconis' device received again an incoming call through the home cell site. Roughly 18 minutes later, her device utilized this tower and sector here for an incoming call, before then utilizing this cell site up here adjacent to the Russian Speeder car wash. That was for an outgoing call at 9:12, and then followed by an incoming call at 9:13. Both of those numbers were with, both of those calls were with a number 203-918-4877, which was provided to me as another phone number for Mr. Dulos. Now, jumping forward in the day, we pick back up at 2:20. Ms. Troconis' device utilizes that same tower and different sector at 2:20 for an incoming text message, consistent with her device being back up in the area of the Russell Speeder car wash.
And I want to direct your attention to between 9:13 and 2:20, specifically approximately 1:40 in the afternoon. Did Mr. Troconis' device receive a phone call that's not reflected on this slide?
That's correct. So Mr. Troconis' device had received a phone call from a number associated with the Russell Speeder car wash. The cell site and location of that was not relevant to my analysis at the time and is not included on here, but the call itself.
Next slide. Okay. Thank you, Agent Horn. You can have a seat. Thank you. If I just have a moment, Judge. Nothing further, Judge.
Thank you.
May I just return the exhibits?
Yes.
Or actually, if you want to hang on to that, I suppose.
I'm going to use the paper exhibit, so excuse me for that. The paper exhibit. Now, if you want to just- Oh, you have?
Sorry.
I thought it was just returned, so I didn't
realize
realize
you meant this one.
Thank you. I'm going to use the Elmo to ask you some questions about that. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So as I understand it, you were asked to plot certain cell tower activity based on 2 cell phones. Is that correct?
That's what my report reflects, yeah, the 2 phones.
You were told, or how did you determine that both of those phones were AT&T subscribers?
That information, the records provided by AT&T were given to me by the prosecution.
So one of the things that you said in your report, and I'm just going to point to it, on page, well, there's actually, the numbers are hard to read, but it looks like it's the 3rd page of this exhibit. And I'll just make it so that you can see it a little bit better. The second bullet point on what I believe to be page 3, although it's cut off on the paper copy, says that when powered on, mobile devices constantly scan their environment looking for the cell site which provides the strongest, clearest, and overall best signal. That's what you testified to, correct?
That is correct.
And the next sentence says, this signal generally comes from the cell tower / cell site that is closest to the mobile device or the tower with the best line of sight. You wrote that, right?
I did, yes.
So that's an alternative, right? It's a disjunctive, correct? It's either this site that is closest to the mobile device or the tower with the best line of sight is what you wrote here, correct?
Those would be the most likely towers that the phone would see as best.
Towers plural, correct?
Tower that the phone would see as best? There's only one tower that the phone would see as best.
Right, but in terms of where it's choosing, I mean, I'm using a word like choice, but where the phone decides, if you will, to connect, it's either the closest or it's the one with the best line of sight, correct?
No.
Kimbo, are you talking about, do I know the score with the whole VTuber thing? I do. There's a lot I've actually learned about it in the past couple of days, so Kirsha might have me on to talk about it. But as far as the burner phone game goes, yeah, guys, there's a whole way to do it where you can have an untraceable burner phone that you can use when you need to. It's not hard to do. It's not hard to do, and it's not a bad thing to do. If you like $100, you can get squared away with the phone in a couple of minutes on it. So, something to think about.
That's not only the two options. I believe I said the signal generally comes from the cell tower cell site that is closest or the one with the best line of sight.
So generally, it's one of those two.
Generally, yes.
Sometimes it might be the same location, correct?
The tower that it sees as best is the one with the best line of sight?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Now, did you actually go to any of these tower locations in the Farmington Valley of Connecticut?
I had no need to.
Did you look at a topography map of the area?
I did, actually.
Is that one of the items that was shown to you when it was put up on the screen a minute ago?
A topography map is not included
You
in
didn't
my
use a
report.
topography map to create this report, did you?
The visualization of the records as shown on my map was done by software, where we reach out to Google Maps and pull map tiles. I, as part of my typical process, go and look on Google Earth to look at the topography, look at the area where the cell towers are located to generally understand what's going on. Is it an urban area? Is it a rural area? Those factors potentially could impact my opinion as to the general location of a device.
Incidentally, did you also look at any of the applications by the phone companies regarding their towers and what area they sought to cover through any of the ones that you just testified about?
Their applications where?
To build them.
No.
You're aware that that's public source information, correct?
It's available on the FCC website.
And sometimes within a state as well, correct?
There is probably some sort of state licensing authority.
And are you trained to actually be able to read the technical details of the towers and their azimuth angle and all that stuff that comes from engineering?
I feel like I can read most of it, yes.
Okay. And do you have a background in engineering?
I do not.
What is your educational background, by the way?
I have an undergraduate degree in finance, a master's, MBA, as well as a CPA license.
Okay. And do any of those degrees require a background in engineering in order to complete those degrees?
They do not.
I want to ask you specifically, and I'm just going to, if I may. There's pictures of the things. I'm going to mark this for ID. I'm going to ask you specifically about the tower that you referred to.
He's
in your
fucking
report
crushing me right
that
now,
you pulled.
too.
Home,
Be real.
I don't want to use the incorrect terminology. Home cell site?
Generically, I refer to it as the home cell site for simplicity's sake.
And you use that term because it's you testified it's the closest to the home itself?
Well, yes, because the latitude and longitude for that particular device placed the device at the residence. It was a femtocell, as I mentioned, a cell signal extender for the home.
And the one you're referring to as the home cell tower is the one that's marked as CID 25802 in your report? Is that correct?
That'd be incorrect. It would be the CID 20123 to the right.
The one to the right. And which one does this specifically go to in the diagram?
So that particular CID, or cell ID, refers to the green circle that's at the residence. As
That's
it's
the address, that's the home.
correct, and that's the latitude and longitude for that particular home cell site that was provided by AT&T.
And when you say it's a cell site, could you explain again when your home becomes a cell site? Does that mean there's a tower on the roof like you pointed out the window at that apartment building out there, or something different?
No, something different. So it's a small device that you would buy and install by plugging in and connecting to your internet. It allows your signal to get boosted, in this particular case for AT&T, within the home so that you have better reception with your AT&T phone. To install it, you need to obviously power it on, have it near a window so it can take a GPS measurement of where it's physically located, and then you're ready to go with it.
So would it be fair to say it's like a booster to your cell site in case you're in a difficult area?
Yes.
That's a yes?
Yeah.
Now, you're also familiar with Wi-Fi connection, somebody's cell phone connecting by Wi-Fi, correct?
Yes, I am.
Now, if they have Wi-Fi and internet, would the phone connect to the home cell site or to a cell tower or to neither?
Can you ask the
If they
question?
were using their phone using Wi-Fi signal from their home, would that phone also connect to either the home cell site or an external tower?
So if your phone was at home and you had your Wi-Fi turned on, but you were not in airplane mode, so you still had cellular connectivity with your device, depending on what you're doing with the device, it would either route over Wi-Fi or through the home cell site.
And if it routes through the Wi-Fi, it would not show up on your diagram, right?
Correct. If it was a Wi-Fi call, there would be no cell site associated with it in the records. If we look at AT&T records, in many instances, Wi-Fi calling is in fact shown, but again, no cell site is shown with it. So I wouldn't be able to map that out.
All right. Now, with regard to the tower that you referred to as CITD 25802, this one over here, did you look at any information about that tower and where it was specifically where it was located?
Yes, it appears to be co-located with a Verizon cell site as well.
When you say co, that means it's a Verizon and AT&T site?
Yes, the physical pole itself has antennas for both AT&T as well as Verizon.
And did you look at any of the details for the construction and reasons given for the need for that particular tower?
No, because it wouldn't impact my analysis.
Well, you did indicate, did you not, in your report? Again, I'll go back to page 3 for a minute. And I'm just going to refer you down at the bottom of your report after it says cell sites and sectors. The second to last bullet point states that the location of a cell site is often determined by sales marketing capacity, improvement of coverage, or expansion growth of a service provider. And then you go on to say something about overlapping coverage in urban areas and less in rural. But let me just ask you about that first sentence. Right? Have you ever read an application by any of the major cell companies about the need to put a tower and what they're trying to cover with that particular site?
I have definitely read applications for cell tower placement. I can't recall if it included the reasoning behind it, but again, it wouldn't impact my analysis at all.
Well, let me ask you a question. In your experience, doesn't the cell company have to justify their need for yet another cell tower in an area that has that?
Judge, I'm just going to object at this point to relevance.
Well, the issue at this point is, as the court understands the question, have you ever read the applications? Response was yes. The witness has read applications. Have you ever read applications and essentially considered the reasoning for cell tower placement that may or may not be contained in the application? Relevance to the issues in this case.
Well, it was a preliminary to the next question, which I will refer directly to the report, but I would just ask if he ever has, if I may have a little bit of leeway with regard to that.
Well, the leeway is really a two-lane road, not four, because the reason for the application seems beyond relevance, but the court will allow the question.
Did you ever look to see whether any of these towers were, as you note in the last bullet point on that page, that antennas on cell sites have a downward tilt and are pointed towards the earth? Did you check to see if that was the case in any of the cell tower locations that you put on your map?
I didn't need to check that because that's the standard. Their towers have to be, the antennas have to be pointed down towards the earth. There has to be down tilt. If the antennas were pointed straight out, radio frequency would just continue forever and shoot over the top of all the customers that are down on the ground. So every cell tower has slight down tilt.
Okay, well, you had indicated that the newer towers can be just on something like a telephone pole.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A cell phone tower has to be pointed at the ground. It's an antenna. This is... I know what he's trying to do, and you're trying to, like, get you the expert, but he just got you there. Like, they all have to be angled down at some point. Like, they have to be ultimately some issue with that. So, gotta be careful here. You gotta know what you're saying.
Or even something shorter than that or lower than that. What I'm trying to indicate is it obviously can't point too straight down, or it'll only cover the area around that phone pole, correct?
That would be correct, if it was pointed straight down. Yep.
So as I understand, cell towers, radio frequencies sort of travel out, not in a straight line, but sort of like in a cloud-like direction, like waves that go out from a source location.
So radio frequency itself is a wave. It operates in a wave similar to any other type of frequency. The sector itself is designed to, yes, propagate out the signal, all 120 degrees as shown. Radio frequency does travel in a straight line though, even though it's a wave. So when it hits something, it bounces off. It can have refraction, reflection, etc. But it's not the radio frequency itself is not sort of like a spaghetti noodle, just making its way through the air. It's a straight line.
Straight line, but in a downward direction, correct?
Yes.
Now I'm going to just mark this for identification. You indicated that as part of your analysis, you look at Google Earth topography. That's a yes.
Yes, sorry.
And did you look at it for the particular towers that we're dealing with here?
I did, yes.
Did or did not?
I did, yes. Okay.
So are you aware that the home cell site is on top of a mountain? Are you aware of that?
The home cell site, the latitude and longitude for that was on top of the house.
Is what?
The latitude and longitude provided for that home cell site, the femtocell, corresponded with the house.
And were you aware that the house is on the top of a mountain?
No, I was not.
We're aware that the mountain is surrounded by valleys on both sides of that house.
When I looked at the house on Google Earth, it looked like a very nice property that had, a lot of space between its neighbors. I didn't look at the altitude of the residence relative to the areas around it.
You also noted on the last paragraph of
This
your
is
report
2019, so
that
they would've had
antenna arrays are
5G.
fine-tuned to provide a specific area of coverage, correct?
That is correct.
And that is something that, again, that would be in the application, publicly available information about the purpose and the area coverage that the provider wants, correct?
I imagine so, yeah.
I'm sorry?
I would imagine it would be, yeah.
Incidentally, if there is a home cell site, as there was on 4 Jefferson Crossing, if a person was in the home, would it necessarily attach to that site unless, as I asked before, the person using their phone was attached to the Wi-Fi?
Well, again, it would depend on what the settings and configurations were with the phone at that time relative to whether or not it was in airplane mode and what activity was being conducted on the phone. So historically, phones would utilize Wi-Fi when surfing using high resource intensive activities like surfing the web, internet, data session type activities, and then fall back to the cellular network for phone calls. Now, if Wi-Fi enabled calling was active on the phone, then the phone could use Wi-Fi to place calls, receive calls, etc.
In fact, I want to just be clear about one thing. You did indicate that line of sight was one of the, or best line of sight is one of the algorithms, if you will, that the cell device looks for. I'm using the wrong terminology, but it's trying to attach by line of sight, correct?
Yes, line of sight is an important variable or factor that could impact the phone's decision as to which tower and sector it sees as best.
Right. And when you talk about best line of sight in your report on page 3, I mean, using your words here, right? We literally mean line of sight, like visual, that there's no obstruction that would make it difficult for the signal to pass through, correct?
The traditional definition of line of sight would be that. We have clear line of sight to that cell site up there on top of that roof. There's nothing between us and that cell site.
So that, we'll use that, we've used that as an example. So we see that tower, there's glass here, but if whichever company owned that tower, there would be a direct line of sight standing in this courtroom or sitting in this courtroom towards that tower. And if that is on your subscribers, it's one of your subscribers' company's devices, it would maybe attach to that tower, correct?
Yeah, if we were sitting here as my analogy before mentioned, if that tower and sector provided the best service and has clear line of sight, your phone would choose that potentially over one that's a little bit closer. That might be on the other side of the courthouse because the radio frequency from your phone doesn't have to travel through the rest of the courthouse, right? It doesn't have to go through the concrete and rebar. We have clear line of sight. Windows is not going to impact the radio frequency from your phone.
So going back now to, and again, this page of the exhibit is cut off, but it looks like this is probably a 9. Because the next page looks like it's probably a 10. You see where I'm pointing, right?
I had it before. Yep.
That's 10, even though the copy it doesn't show it. And then 9 is page before. So again, if I'm referring to this particular tower, which you indicated is 25802, correct?
That is correct.
You're aware that this particular tower is on a farm in the valley that you mentioned the river in, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware that just on the other side of this river, there's a 600-foot cliff?
I was not.
That would affect line of sight towards Fort Jefferson Crossing, wouldn't it?
It could, yes.
I'm going to show you some, and I'll show it to you unless,
To these.
yeah.
Well, if you can authenticate them, I've never seen these, John. You just gave them to me. So I do have an objection right now.
I'm going to show the witness some images that I'm not going to yet show to the jury, so I want to make sure that we turn that down. And I just want to make sure if I put this into my machine, this is Exhibit GG for identification, that it doesn't show that. By the way, did your report, which has been entered into evidence, Exhibit 145, include coordinates, GPS coordinates of where these sites were and whatnot?
The sites themselves?
Yeah. The actual maps that you included in your report, do they include GPS coordinates?
The dots themselves were generated off of the GPS provided by AT&T.
All right, so I'm going to ask you if you would just look, I'm going to just make sure the main screen is off. It's off. Do you recognize this to be a Google Earth topography map?
It's showing no signal on my screen here.
Can you see it okay on your screen?
No, it's showing no signal. It's a blue screen.
Is there a button I need to press to allow the small screen to, is it on this or directly on the TV? I don't know.
Should be it. Where's your computer?
Will.
Yeah, that should do it.
It wasn't plugged in.
It takes about 10 seconds.
I got it.
You're familiar with this type of Google Earth diagram, correct?
Yes, I am.
And do you agree that it encompasses some of the same area that's in the diagrams in your report that we've just all seen?
It does.
And down at the bottom, you see there is a topography elevation profile that's included from a spot along the road up to Fort Jefferson Crossing. Do you see that?
I do.
And assuming, for purposes of your testimony, that the distance from the tower, which is 189 feet, to Fort Jefferson Crossing, which is at an elevation of a gain of 731 feet, that would affect the ability of a tower in the valley to reach Fort Jefferson Crossing, wouldn't it?
I would expect that is just to orient myself, is the blue line, the left side of that blue line, where that tower was that we were just discussing?
Well,
Do you want to compare it to your diagram?
yeah, I think it should come from the witness and not counsel, Judge.
Well,
Well, if the witness had a question, however, counsel shouldn't answer the question.
Right.
Counsel should just give the witness his map
Right.
so that he can orient
Thank
it to the ID exhibit.
All right, thank you. Yes, so do you mind repeating your question again?
yes. Assuming that the pinpoint of the blue line, as you asked, is the location of the tower to Jefferson Crossing, and assuming also you're familiar with the elevation profile of Google Earth, would the fact that the tower elevation of 189 feet up to a total of gain of 731 feet to 4 Jefferson Crossing affect the ability of that tower to reach the location of 4 Jefferson Crossing?
Judge, please, the court, the question is vague. There's multiple towers. I'm not sure which one counsel's referring to.
It's when I had shown him, I can't do both at the same time. We talked about the exact same tower that he's now looking at his map on.
Could you just identify it for the record?
Well, the question is, the ability of a certain tower, well, it wouldn't be the tower itself, the ability of the signal, the court understands the question to involve, to reach 4 Jefferson Crossing at that elevation, if the tower is at 170-something feet and the 4 Jefferson Crossing elevation is around 700 and something feet. That's how the court understands the question.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you answer that?
So in this situation, I would say that it's hard to say. I can't say for certain one way or another. I think that the tower that is at 100 and whatever feet, I don't recall how tall the tower was, but it wasn't a small little light pole one. But additionally, when radio frequency it propagates, it travels out, it bounces off of things. It can sort of essentially walk its way up a side of a mountain. I've seen it when I was in Colorado many, many different times at a much greater elevation than called 600 feet. Without further tools, and obviously we can't go back in time at this point, I can't say one way or another.
So let me ask you a different question. Didn't you just testify a few minutes ago that cell towers aim downward?
They do.
So now you're saying
Judge, I'm gonna-
that they
Judge,
crawl up the
objection.
side of a mountain?
Objection, if I may. We still haven't identified the tower number.
I'm sorry,
Well,
for the record, I didn't do that.
The difficulty is that the jury cannot see the ID
Right,
exhibit.
I'm going to, I understand. I have a couple other pictures I'm going to show, but I'll, for the record, indicate we're talking about CID 25802 is the cell tower.
Thank you.
At issue, all right? I'm going to show you a couple of other images, if I may. So were you aware, for example, just from your review, that this particular cell tower is on a farm in Farmington on Town Farm Road?
I looked at the tower. I didn't know if it was a farm, but it was behind a structure off of the road.
Well, I'm showing you an image which is on my exhibit for ID GG. It's just counted as 1114 JPEG, right? Does that refresh your recollection that the tower was disguised as a tree on a farm next to a farm?
Disguised as a tree, yes. This angle is different than the one I remember looking at. I was looking at it down the driveway with the tree in the back.
But you remember that you saying you looked at Google Street View?
Correct.
Okay, so you recall though that the tower you did look at was actually a pole with fake pine needles on it, right?
Yep.
So even though it's a different angle than this picture, this fairly naturally represents the way the tower looked next to the farm.
Yes.
And I'm just going to show you, if you used Google Maps, Street View, showing you first image 1113, if you recall, this is what's across the street from the cell tower.
Well, Judge, I'm going to object to counsel testifying. He should ask the witness a question.
Cross-examination.
Right, well, the court is cognizant of different styles. Some lawyers don't ask a question, they just make a statement and expect the witness to answer. Other lawyers use a leading question with a question. The court has allowed latitude for both. So you can ask the leading question, counsel, but the court has accepted your style as a different style.
I either say thank you or, I don't know, but I don't know if that the question.
The question, well, the objection's overruled.
Oh, okay. So if I just zoom in, right, do you recall that there's almost a sheer cliff between where the cell tower is and Avon Mountain? Want me to zoom in closer? Did you see that when you were using the Google Street View?
I did not turn away from the tower to look at the eastern direction.
But you don't dispute that this is in fact the area directly across the street from where that farm and the cell tower?
I'm taking you at your word. I never looked at it. I don't know.
Well, right now, we're going to take our afternoon recess until 4:15. Ladies and gentlemen, please do not discuss.
Attorney Schemmerhorn's asking some good questions. Like, did you know there's like a 400-foot drop between these towers? There's like a 600-foot cliff. Like, those are all big issues to say, why aren't these things lining up right? Or why is he pinging off these towers? Which I think goes back to the idea that Michelle said, like, they were in the office together. But we'll see. The jury's probably not paying attention
Wait,
yet,
please.
but we'll see.
Yes, Judge.
Thank you.
So I understand that I'm just going to indicate that during the break, the state is withdrawn any concern, so I'm offering Gigi as a full exhibit.
I have no objection.
Defense, GG, admitted as full.
So now it'll be So I'm going to go back, Agent Hoyland, to the Google Earth diagram that I had showed you earlier. You indicated you recognize, oh, that's what I have, sorry. Oh, I should unplug and replay.
If that doesn't work, that's the easiest.
Okay, great. All right, so earlier I had asked you about Google Earth, and then it also has the topography feature. And you talked about the blue line, which is the location where that particular cell tower, which we identified as, I think CID 25802 is located, correct?
That sounds correct, yes.
And that following the topography, the elevation gain was 731 feet, correct?
Yeah, I don't know how that's calculated. It looks like it's 189 on the left side from where the dot is to.
89 is the height of the tower, correct?
Is that what you obtained? It looks like 189 is the marker where the blue dot, the left side of that blue line would start at 189 and then grow up to roughly 700, just over 677 on the right side at 4 Jefferson Crossing.
Okay.
But semantics.
And you did talk about you were asked a question about the tower, that it was up somewhere in Avon on 44, and you indicated that oftentimes the signal will travel through a river valley, an open area between trees. You indicated as a likelihood for a signal to travel farther, correct?
Judge, I'm just going to object to Ms. State's testimony. I didn't ask about Route 44.
Well, there was testimony concerning travel through trees. And there
And
was
travel through
testimony
valleys.
concerning obstructions for signals. So the court is going to allow this testimony overruled.
In my experience, when they are either natural, natural made, types of structures, or valleys, gullies, or a river where there's dense woods on either side and there's a cell tower at one end of that river, that it creates essentially like a funnel, right? It's just like imagine like a skateboard kind of ramp, right? The radio frequency would travel down that path because the obstructions are on the right side, right and left side of it. It's not in the river.
So So the point being, though, that depending on topography, where the person or the cell phone is or cell device is in relation to the tower depends on the topography, correct?
It does, yes.
So I'm going to just show you that you had previously identified, I call it image 114, and the jury is asking, you recall that having looked at these images on Google Street View, you observed this farm, correct?
Correct.
And would you just identify for the jury what exactly is the cell tower in this picture?
Sure. May I? Yes. Thank you, Your Honor. So in this particular instance, it is the fake tree. In certain communities, they only will allow companies to build cell towers if they help them hide within their natural environments. In this case, it's a fake pine tree.
And if I zoom in a little, are you able to identify some of the actual antenna within the tree, fake tree branches to demonstrate that that's what this is?
Yes. From this view, it appears this is an antenna. That might be an antenna. Looks like there's another row of antennas on that level, and even possibly maybe a third row in the fake tree.
Okay. So also during the break, you had an opportunity to look at what was across the street from this tower, correct?
Yes, you showed me the Google Street View.
Right, and this is the view from across from the farm, is that right?
It is.
And when I refer to the mountain, we were talking about this large natural landscape with a couple of houses up at the top, correct?
Yes.
And I believe you would agree that if this is something like 600 or 700 feet, and the tower's at 190, whatever the number, 195 feet, and it's pointed, the antennas are pointed downward, that it would be difficult for that tower to connect to a cell phone that was located at that moment at 4 Jefferson Crossing, right?
Based on the topography, it looks like Jefferson Crossing is just over the apex.
It's on the other side facing the Hartford direction, which would be the opposite
Well,
side
I'm
of
going
the
to
mountain.
object,
Well-
Judge. Counsel's testifying.
Well, there's been, we put in that drone video, Your Honor, so I'll rephrase the question. I will. Assuming that the house actually is on the other side, certainly on the other side of the street at the top of that mountain, and it's facing towards either the University of Connecticut Health Center in the direction of West Hartford on this western side of Avon Mountain, would it not be very difficult, if not impossible, for that cell tower to connect to a cell device that was located inside 4 Jefferson Crossing?
Based on the topography shown from that Google Earth, I would agree with that statement. I think that the way that the cell tower works, obviously, it's down tilted, right? So the radio frequency comes off that tower and eventually will hit the ground. When it hits the ground, it'll bounce back up. Depending on the angle, it'll start to fill in the gap on that mountain. If you remember, I mentioned sort of like climbing up the mountain. That's what I mean by that. It's purely a physics geometry thing. However, once you get to the apex or the top of that mountain, there's nothing to stop the radio frequency. It would continue on forever. So if something was on the other side of the top, I would find it extremely difficult that cell tower would provide coverage to that house, let alone the best coverage for the phone.
Okay, so all of this is to, and there's one more picture I'm just going to show you. This has been marked as 115, and this is just another view from just south of that cell tower and the farm. Again, you agree that this is a rather steep cliff on the mountain, correct?
It appears to have some good height to it, yes. A couple hundred feet, for sure.
Now, assuming, again, just for my question, that as the mountain goes south towards the right of this image, it gets lower down. Is it more likely, that is, that the mountain is not as steep, that a cell tower located at Town Farm Road, the one I showed you at the farm, could reach down this valley even further than where the tower is?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to repeat the question because I got lost a little bit.
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Is there a picture maybe you could use?
If we go back to your, do you have your report still there?
I do not.
You do not. I think maybe this clerk has it. And I'm not going to put it up again, but if I turn, let's say, to page 10, show you, may I approach your honor?
Yes.
Page 10.
I do.
If the tower, as we indicated, is located CID 25802, could it travel south along that river valley further and to attach to cell phones that were even further away?
Do you mean like down in this area?
Yes?
I would think that would be plausible.
Okay. So as I understand then your testimony, the location of where a cell device attaches to a cell tower doesn't have to be the closest location, does it?
It does not, no.
And if there is an obstruction, whether it's a building or in this case, a mountain, it could deflect that signal even further away, maybe miles away from where the cell tower site is, correct?
Well, if it reflected the signal continues on forever. It eventually ends up in space. So once it gets reflected, deflected, whatever, it would continue on whatever path it was on. But
So even in a valley, if it's pointing down the valley, if there's a mountain keeping it, shall we say, constrained on one side, it could continue down as long as there's no further obstruction, correct?
yes,
Incidentally, if a person is speaking on or using their cell device and it's attached to a particular tower as they move, the cell device will then attach to different devices along the route of travel, correct?
by different devices, do you mean different cell towers?
To different cell towers, correct?
Correct. So if you start a call and you drive down the highway, your call will get handed off as you travel along the highway. If those handoffs didn't occur, you'd have a drop call. So the network's designed to have slight overlap between towers so that your phone can seamlessly hand off from one tower to another as you travel.
Although there is probably data somewhere that would track each tower that would a person connects to, correct?
Yes, and that information is provided in the AT&T records.
But in AT&T records, if you start let's say, a telephone call at point A, you travel through B, C, D, and E during that same call, it will only show the end location and not the interim location, cell tower, from the provider, correct?
That would be incorrect. So AT&T is the only carrier which does in fact show you all of the handoffs that a phone has during voice calls or data sessions, up to a maximum of 20.
But Verizon would, of course,
interesting.
not show that, correct?
Verizon and T-Mobile don't.
Judge, may we approach?
Ooh.
Well, is there an objection?
There is an objection. If I could just be heard at sidebar, Judge, I assure you it is.
Well, the court is aware of what the testimony is at this point, but the court does not see the relevance as to whether all of the interim antenna will pick up a call as a device travels.
Judge,
I think they're
wanted
going to
to
get into
approach on
an
a
issue
different
of
issue if
what's.
I apologize. I would never interrupt counsel's examination like this, but it's important.
They're going to get into a topic they don't want to get into.
Fine.
It's something like that. I don't know what it is, guys, but they're going to get into something. Yeah, I don't know what they're going to get to, but it's going to be something very, Yeah, that said, Unhung Hero for $2. Oh, I'm going to come. Don't come. Don't come. Zaven says, you didn't take the phone? That means you're your bad man. Yes, it does. And Kazuhira Miller says, yep, Fanny's dad is a deep state, I almost said deep state. Deep state spook. Very well could have been an intelligence asset. I mean, running around what he did, you know, the Black Panthers, yeah, he was definitely being run by somebody. So, not really a shocker. Not really a shocker. So, let's see. 45-minute tease. Yeah. JXC saying someone's in trouble. Not right now. This is an issue of, I think they were asking a question and getting to the triangulation. And that if the prosecutor's like, look, if we go into this territory, it's going to be a problem. So no, it's not a proprietary issue because that's not an issue they have to bring up. I bet it's an issue about what they could get off Michelle's phone and they weren't allowed to get off her phone because of the warrant. I think they're just, something's come up. Or you know what? You know what it might be, actually? This might be the whole issue about Michelle and her Post-it note. That might be the issue right there. Because hold on, what time are we at? Yeah, we're getting to the point of Michelle and her Post-it note. So, if you guys weren't aware, Michelle got in trouble for putting exhibits up so other people and her family could read them. I think that might be what they were talking about. I forgot where I'm almost at
So
the end
the
here.
last question really had to do with interim hits off of towers as a device moved. There was no objection as to relevance. So the court is going to allow the question.
I'm
I'm just going to conclude. This isn't the only report you prepared with regard to this case, is that correct?
That's correct.
You prepared a separate report a month ago that included a third person, correct?
That is correct.
Ooh.
And that was the following tracking the travels or the travels of the phone belonging to a Kent Mawhinney, correct?
That is correct.
Now we just mark this for identification. I'm just going to ask you if you recognize this, and then I'll show it to council.
Yes,
This is a report that you prepared,
that's correct.
and you prepared it in December,
Correct.
this past December.
Correct, yes.
I have no objection if council wants to introduce it.
What is the exhibit letter?
Double H, page 8.
Double H admitted as full.
I have no further questions.
The redirect.
I have nothing further, Judge.
Thank you. Mr. Hoyland, you may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you.
Now it's the fun part. Michelle getting in trouble.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the state's witnesses for this afternoon. The court has been informed that there will be testimony tomorrow, and it'll be a lot of video testimony. In other words, video of interviews. And we'll adjust the break schedule accordingly as those interviews take hours. So have a good evening, and please do not discuss the case. Please do not follow any media about the case. Have a good evening.
Are you going to get this? Because it's not also.
So we're gonna get to this part, guys. Here we go. We already covered it on Saturday night, but on Friday night, but yeah, it's gonna be Michelle, getting in trouble for fucking with the evidence.
Just a note from reads that Mr. Troconis appears to have a text from a sealed report on her monitor.
Hi, Hella. Hey, Dolly. Looks like we got a Helen Dolly raid. Hi, Hella. Looks like it's got don't hearsay for days. You guys are just joining us in the Michelle Troconis issue. Michelle got caught allegedly putting up confidential reports and letting people in the gallery, particularly her family and friends, read restricted confidential reports from the Children's Services case. And yeah, she's about to get in trouble for that. So here we go.
In a very high, big font. The beginning of it reads, Dr. Krasner told me, in quotes, which the only reason why the state is reading that quotation, Your Honor, is that is the note. Now, the state brought this to the court's attention. This is also not the first time that we have heard that Mr. Troconis has been putting things on her laptop for other people to see. For instance, there's actually an article in the Stanford Advocate that during, I think, either Christine Roy's testimony or Kristen Mandell's testimony, she had a article with a headline that Dr. Lee is held liable for impeaching or something to do with his testimony. The only implication there was an attempt to.
Related to the blood results.
It was related to the blood results in his testimony. The only implication to have that up is an attempt to either put that out in the press or for a witness to see. So this is the second time we've had a concern. We didn't address that first with the court because it was we didn't see it or hear anything. We actually read it in the Stanford Advocate. The concern the state has is this notion that she would have access on her device to a report that it starts off that a member of the audience is able to see, which is clearly under seal. So that is concerning. The second major point is that that was displayed for the public with a news camera behind us, and that she shouldn't even have read it to begin with. So it is a huge concern at this point that I'm bringing to the court's attention. We can't gloss over the serious nature of the idea of a violation of her having access to the report, her displaying it for everybody to see, essentially. And three, also there was another instance where we're not sure if she or a member of her family was melding to the jury earlier in this trial. So now we're at a point where this has to be raised on the record. And I bring that to the court's attention to address in some way.
Well, does the state know who handed the state the note?
If I may just inquire, Your Honor, my inspector is back.
The court is not asking for an identification. but
Yes,
does-
Your Honor.
So the first consideration by this court is to find out from the person who handed the state the note how that person was able to determine what was seen on the screen. So of course, that's not going to be done on the record in this proceeding. But in other words, how did this come to the state's attention? Who brought it to the state's attention? Did you want to be heard, Attorney Felsen?
Very briefly, I'm not sure which order to address things in. I will say it was my understanding that any video that was taken would not display our screen, so it would not be available to the public. We've taken great pains to work with people who are handling the cameras and the videos to ensure that all of our communications, whatever's on our monitors or on our desk, remains
Yeah, this is
private
not good.
and inaccessible to other people. As far as the report is concerned, I'm not sure how anybody in the audience would know the contents of what would be in a sealed report. I know that I have not reviewed the report in its entirety. I have never seen it on a computer. I had reviewed the last 4 or 5 pages that I was provided, and they were in paper form. I can say that I have never shared the contents of the report with Ms. Troconis. I do not know, in fact, whether she was reading from a memo or what it was. I don't intend to ask her and discuss it at this point in time. What I can say is I know there have been a lot of notes that have been passed back and forth with information that is now just being shared. If I had known that there was an issue with the public possibly viewing what was on our screens, I would have taken steps to ensure that that wouldn't happen, and I can do that from here on in.
Well, the court's first concern is, and the court understands that we are talking
Yes, we watched this the other day. We're now watching it happen in real time as progression on the trial. Yeah, this is not good. And I've been in that position before where you're sitting there and your client has done something now misconduct-wise you've got to deal with. And that's not pleasant because now you're like, I didn't do anything wrong. Like, you know, the judge is not happy. These contents actually detail are the reports from Children's Services, like the things filed by the guardian ad litem, other things involving the children's case. So, Ronnie's saying, she's sitting right next to her. Yeah, but she's busy, she's busy trying to get the fucking case going. She doesn't know what Michelle's doing. So, no, I don't actually blame her at this point because she's trying to get her job done and her client might be a shithead. But this happens. I'm busy running the trial. So.
talking about the custody evaluation.
Yes, Your Honor. And the only reason, again, while I indicate that is I do believe the individual who saw it is a close friend of Jennifer's and would recognize a name that was on the report or on Mrs. Troconis's computer.
What the court has to task the State Attorney's Office with is to find out as much information as it can as to how, first of all, the individual recognized whatever was on the screen.
Yes, Your Honor.
How they were able to see it from their vantage point. Was it broadcast? Was it live streamed? And the court is just going to have to begin tomorrow's proceeding without the jury, because what is happening at this point is there appears to be, the court has issued a protective order and sealed that custody report. If that custody report is being disseminated, and if it's being disseminated essentially with the involvement of the defendant, then the court has to take certain action. Because then it's a violation of a court order, and there would have to be a contempt hearing. Stand in a recess until tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
So the judge is not happy. The judge is not happy, but he's told them, you got to figure out what happened here and come back tomorrow morning and we'll talk about it. So, yeah, the state's going to interact with that person who knew Jennifer, who knew Jennifer, and going to talk to her and say, how do you recognize the names? How do you understand it? What did you see exactly? And they're going to go through the report and see if they can find all those parts and pieces. And, you know, they might, that witness, you know, it doesn't happen. But, you know, that witness might have to come in and, sit down and take, you know, give testimony. Yeah, I saw it. Here's what happened. And she might have to sit there and be cross-examined. You know, the judge might hold a contempt proceeding. That totally can happen. That I've seen that happen before in trials. I've had to deal with this before where my client's done something or their family member did something and we have to basically do testimony of another party. You don't want to be here. It does not help your family. It does not help your client, and it doesn't help their case. My friend says, "Ay, Jennifer, mi mama sent no picture." The judge is hitting at what I'm also thinking, how would the person know what the person viewing it know that it's a sealed report? They could have seen that another way. I don't know, but they would have recognized the name. I'm not sure. Yeah, there's an issue there, I think, but that's a secondary, like, well, how do you know about it? Maybe it wasn't always sealed is the thing. It's not exactly clear. Alf's saying, I know. How would the reader know what those things are? Probably because the reader saw Jennifer let a copy of it. So I bet that's how she knows. So that's it for today, guys, on day 22. So this would have been Thursday. Day 23 is next. I don't think we have time for that tonight. Starting at 7, I am going on with Watcher, Blaine Pardo, and a couple of guys. And we are doing a board game. We're doing a tabletop game. It's like a cyberpunk version of a game. It's starting at 7 p.m. Eastern time. I encourage you guys to stop by and take a look at it. It should be fun. It's actually a pretty like straightforward type of game where you don't actually have to, like, there's not an elaborate set of rules. You don't have to make your... I've got like an 85 level paladin I've been working on for 25 years. None of that kind of craziness. It's basically you start over with a fresh thing every time. Yeah, hold on, here we go. It's going to be... This is the link, guys. Here's the link. It's going to be on the Future Conflicts channel. But here's the link for it. And I think it should be a fun time if you guys want to stop by. Yeah, so it's going to be pretty fun. And, yeah. So, otherwise, guys, tomorrow we'll probably start at Michelle Troconis because, remember, it's President's Day, so there's no court tomorrow. And we'll get caught up. So, like the stream. Yes, like it. That'd be great. So, yes, you guys have a great night tonight, and I will see you guys around. And, yeah, this was another snoozer. This doesn't hurt Michelle. None of this has hurt Michelle so far. So, I don't, I'm not looking at this like Michelle's in trouble yet. So, take it as you will. So, guys, have a nice night, and I'll see you at 7, and then tomorrow we'll probably get going to Michelle, probably like normal hours. You know what? We might start it around like 10 o'clock, I'm thinking, because I'll be up. I got to get work done, but we'll get Michelle going kind of early and be done early. And then do the live show tomorrow night on Locals. So, guys, have a great night, and see you tomorrow.